Good afternoon, good evening. It's been one of
It's
those.
one of those things.
Yeah,
One of those days.
Free shot.
Just know it's Wednesday.
It is.
Monday, Wednesday, and it's on my schedule.
You're agreeing it is 6:01 and the recording has started.
Thank you. Robert Chisholm responded. Seemed like he was. All right, we'll call the meeting to order of the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee. For a motion to approve the minutes.
So
Thank you. For a second. For Hans. Did anyone have any corrections or discussion on the minutes? Okay, let's vote to approve. All in favor, state aye. Aye. Opposed, same. Okay, the minutes are approved unanimously. So, and generally, do you listen to it, the meeting? Okay, cool. Because a lot of times different committees do it different ways, but I've been on committees where if you didn't attend, then you abstain from approval of minutes. But now that that was also prior to them being recorded. And when they're recorded, and if you've gone through it, then there's no reason you couldn't approve. So I think that's great. I'm glad you listened. All right, now we're entering our public forum, an opportunity for the public to address the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee. There's an expectation that the presentation will be conducted in a respectful manner. Committee members may ask questions for clarification. There will not be back and forth dialogue. Please limit your presentation to 3 minutes. Anyone present who'd like to address us? Yeah, please come forward and.
I get a hot seat tonight.
Yeah. Sure. Stand. Did you sign in to the?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please state your name and.
I'm Sian Dickerson, Bates Logan.
Okay,
Block for me.
right, yeah, District 1.
I would urge not accepting this addition to 6-5-1. This revision allows code enforcement to have excessive power. Title 15 has many loopholes to create confusion to citizens and allow for improper enforcement and cost. No evidence has been produced that a problem of reinspection exists. See, code enforcement has not produced evidence that a problem of reinspection exists. Staff liaison. They're just a staff liaison to provide technical data only. It's in our bylaws. It's in the enabling legislation. Such data has not been supplied for years and none for a reinspection fee except that pedophile issue, which wasn't a code enforcement issue to begin with, and they would have never collected anything on it anyway. Lots of evidence that 14-day notice of violations are being issued in error, at least for weeds and grass. No violation actually exists for 90% of the ones that are issued. Instead of a 7-day notice, code enforcement is going directly to a 14-day notice without addresses. So how does anyone know it belongs to the address upon which it's posted or to whom it was mailed? Code still has the option. The code still has in it the option of administrative appeal hearing for citizens that received a 14-day notice. Before it was required to be on the 14-day notice, but it's difficult to find and most citizens don't know about it because it no longer has to be on the 14-day notice. Weeds and grass are seasonal and weather dependent. They should be removed from the nuisance category. It's not code enforcement's job to change code and add codes. That belongs to the committee and the committee alone. This reinspection fine is a process issue. It belongs in Title 15 under 15-3-2. SEAC, this committee, has an established published place of meeting in City Hall. SEAC was never under the city attorney's office, and there is no provision in Title II enabling legislation that puts code enforcement in control of this committee in any way. Code enforcement can only provide technical data. The city manager is required by charter to provide a recording secretary. It cannot be a code enforcement limited peace officer.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Dickerson? You mean about the admin appeal option? I'll get clarification also later, but also from, what do you mean, or what is your
There is
understanding?
in the code, and there was always in the code, the previous code that has been revised, 15, Title 15, it's making everything a nuisance, and it's altered the process. It used to be 7 days notice of violation, 14-day posting notice if there was no compliance. And with that 14-day notice, there had to be specified that pictures had been taken, they hadn't complied. This is an ongoing issue. It had to have your address on it, the address of the property in question. And if you had any complaints about it, it had to have in the notice that you could appeal this administratively if you asked for it within a certain period of time. It's still in the code, but it's not required to be on this 14-day notice. And I happened to know about it, so I went through the code when I got this ridiculous notice, 14-day notice. I brought it with me, but I forgot to bring it up here. It was in the mail. It was dated 6/12. I received it on Saturday, so it was 6/18, I think. And it just said front side of property, weeds and grass. And I go, I don't have any grass. I've got xeriscaping. It's all native plants. And they've grown rather lushly because of all the rains. And on 6/12, it was raining. And I had gone out and worked on the front yard on 6/11. And I looked and looked and I couldn't find a single weed. 6/12, they said I had weeds.
So have you contacted the office?
Yes, I sent an email to the person who signed mine, T. Barron, and told him, look, I don't have any weeds. My neighbors have weeds, but I don't have any weeds.
Did you hear back yet?
No, not a word.
What's that?
Oh, well, I received it on 6/12, on 6/18, or was it 6/17? Anyway, it was Saturday. It was dated 6/12. It did not have my address on it. There was no indication of what the problem was. It just said weeds and grass are prohibited.
And you're saying it's just mailed to you? It wasn't a
It was mailed to
door
me.
hanger?
And it didn't have your address?
It had my address on the envelope, but it didn't have my address on the notice.
Ms. Dickerson, I have a copy of that if you'd like.
A copy of mine?
Point of reference.
So I went out and took a picture of my neighbor's weeds. It was a big thistle that was going to seed, and it was visible from the street. I don't know what this guy was talking about. So I took a picture of hers, and because I didn't want the seeds in my yard, I removed it. Plus, I didn't want her to get into trouble when they managed to come back by. But there was no weeds visible from the street. I found one finally, was digging through my lilac bush because I was going to trim it. And there was one, it was about this tall, was lush. I mean, it didn't even look like the weed.
Okay,
But here's the notice, and it just says front side of property. You have 14 days to comply, or you're going to have it abated. And it doesn't say anything about appealing it. And yet in the code, under, I think it's 15-3-7, it does provide for an administrative appeal hearing. But you have to go to the city clerk and get a form. And I talked to her last night and I said, you didn't answer my email about applying for an administrative appeal.
so you've tried to go through that process?
Right. And she said, oh, I have to get it to you. We never get anybody doing it. And I said, do you think it's because nobody knows about it?
Okay. Well, does anyone else have any questions?
I do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, is
Go
there a phone number for you to call?
Oh, yeah, but I emailed him.
So it has
And
an
there's an
email
email?
and a phone number?
The email isn't on here, but I put the name in at englewoodco.gov or englewoodco.gov. And it didn't come back that the person didn't exist. So
Can I get a date on when you sent the email? Because you mentioned that you
That
hadn't had a
day.
response.
that
Okay.
Saturday,
That was the Saturday, which is
Yeah.
the
it was 4 days ago.
15th.
Yeah, 4 days ago. 4 or 5 days ago.
It's probably the 17th.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like 17. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Dickerson. I appreciate you coming and addressing us and letting us know about your concerns.
May I ask one?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. Are you asking that the, a little notation be added that you can appeal this and this is how you do it? Or to call somebody if you want to appeal it?
Well,
Is
I'm
that what your
asking for a
point
lot of
is?
things. If I had my druthers, weeds and grass would be treated exactly the way snow and ice is. Snow and ice was decriminalized. And we also added a process to enforce the snow and ice removal. Because when we'd call in complaining about snow and ice on sidewalks, code enforcement would just say, it'll melt, and they wouldn't go out and even check. So when I was on this committee, we went through a pretty rigorous process to get it just exactly right. Decriminalize it, put it in the Violations Bureau with an exact process of how it goes.
And that's now, I don't know, you're familiar with it, right? Now the snow and ice, when you get a notice, it's the same kind of thing. You have 14 days to address it. No,
If you don't,
we'll get clarification.
yeah, it's in Title 11, snow and ice. Before it just said you can't do it. You have to remove it. But there was no way to tell when, if it was snowing and snowing and snowing, you couldn't go out and remove it. So we specified when it was
Right.
snow it stopped.
When it's stopped, you
And
have
there was a
24 hours
$50 fine
for your second violation
for
within
the
a
second
year.
violation. And you only got one notice.
Right.
I mean, one fine initially, or one notice to comply.
One
And
notice
then
to
if you
comply.
didn't, the next time it was a $50 fee.
Right.
At least that's what I remember.
And you're saying you think you would prefer weeds to be handled that way?
Yeah, it's seasonal. And look at, it's weather dependent too. There were no weeds in my yard when I got this 14-day notice. It was raining. He couldn't have seen it anyway.
Well, if that were the case and that were to happen in a disputed situation like this, where you're saying you don't have weeds and it was your second violation of the year, you would have already been fined.
Yep.
So you would have had to be fighting a fine.
Well, no, they never don't say you get a second violation notice. They just say re-inspect, and if you didn't comply, or they think you didn't comply because all of a sudden it's rained and everything's grown back up. But I didn't have any weeds. I have native plants, and they are tall.
Right. And I understand that there's sometimes discrepancies between.
Yeah, but the issue is that the amount of rain we've had, things will grow 6 inches in 2 days.
Yeah.
And my neighbors, they mow once a week. They would have to have mowed 3 times a week. And they can't really because they've had to reseed their lawn because of grubs. So they're not supposed to mow it, even though it's over 6 inches.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Okay, you're addressing our committee. I don't see anyone else present. So we'll move on. We'll close the public forum. And move into code enforcement significant events. President Lewis.
So before I go into, what I have specifically written, I wanted to take a moment while we have Officer Kimberly here. We're going to be discussing some park statistics, but I wanted to introduce Officer Kimberly, who serves as our park ranger and animal control officer here within the city. And so I don't think he's actually officially met you all, so I wanted to put a face to a name so that you all know if you've encountered him or see him working on any animal cases. We are very happy to have him as part of this team. He is an animal welfare expert. He comes to us from Aurora, where he has served as an animal welfare officer. He also has a plethora of customer service experience from working within a large big box corporate store within asset protection and managing teams. So we're very lucky to have him here. Very highly educated when it comes to animal welfare matters and certifications. So he's a perfect fit for our park and is doing an amazing job. We've had some great positive feedback about the work that he's doing in the park. And so if you see him out and about, make sure you stop.
The park ranger position, that's a full-time permanent?
It is a full-time FTE. It has been now for 2 years.
That's what I thought. Do we have someone in the seasonal role right now?
We have 2 seasonal code enforcement inspection officers.
Okay. Is that key? That's clear. Okay, that's one of them. All right. Cool.
Thanks for stopping in. Say hi. Do we have any questions for him?
So you have some extensive background around animal stuff?
Yes, way back when I went to school to be a veterinary technician. My wife is also a veterinary technician, so we decided that that probably wasn't the best option for us both to be in there. And I went to be an asset protection manager with Walmart for about 10 years. And I just wanted to go back into the animal side and learn a little bit more about the laws and everything. Since I had a little bit of enforcement with being inside of Walmart, especially with shoplifters and all that. So I wanted to kind of combine the two and just kind of fell into the animal protection role over in Aurora and got quite a bit of experience from them and a lot of different certifications from them.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. Thanks for introducing them. That's great. I like you bringing people in to introduce them and thank you. Let us know them. That's nice. Appreciate that.
Hear a little bit about myself, just for a little bit to zero yours.
So we were supposed to try and discuss a joint meeting between Parks and Rec and this committee. However, we're going to need to wait on making those decisions. There's some administrative things that are happening, such as reappointments and new boards and commissions. And so that's going to take up some of that time at the next meetings and elections. And then they have some.
The city council finished that last night, I think.
Yes, but they're going to be installing their new people and educating them and going through that process and elections for them. So it doesn't really serve a positive purpose because this board will be doing the exact same process within the next phase. So we would probably look at August or September. So I will send out some potential dates at the next meeting as to when we can set up a joint meeting. Okay. And they usually meet all over in the city. They meet in a variety of different locations. They're not always tied to a building. They like to in actually one of the parks, and they do move it around to different parks frequently. They also meet sometimes when they have bad weather or during the winter times in one of the buildings. It could be Parks and Rec buildings, or it could be at a city building. So they are pretty more mobile, and they really do try to go to the parks to see what they're talking about. So we'll work on that. You all had a lot of questions and really wanted us to break down some statistics for you regarding park regulations and park rules. I apologize. I have been out of the office for the last 3 weeks on vacation, and then I had an extensive training on the state level that I attended. And so I wasn't able to approve the packet of information that each of you has on your table. These will be uploaded and added to the notes from this meeting. But it basically explains what one park rules violation is. So the statute related to park rules violation, and it's a vague ordinance. It's kind of a catch-all because as you can see in the last couple pages, we have a list of all of the current approved park rules that the park ranger is responsible for educating and doing enforcement on, as well as any code enforcement officer or police officer. They all serve the same capacity. If we're not here, then a police officer may get called to somebody playing golf in the park and why that's dangerous, and they will take those actions to provide the education. And again, our role is voluntary compliance through education. And so majority of the work and the contacts that are done within the role of park ranger, code enforcement, or police are always done from an educational aspect first and foremost within our parks. And so that kind of brings us into the highlights of statistics. And I know that City Council has received the code enforcement cases by park for 2022. That was a specific request made through Parks and Recreation. And so that was previously presented. And so I wanted to do the comparison so you can see what occurred in 2022 and why our cases were so low at the beginning of the year is we didn't have park ranger established in that role yet. And so that's why a lot of the enforcement efforts didn't take place. But you can kind of see the trends that occur if you were to sit down and we look at it each month. Why is this particular park having more contacts or more cases generated? And it could be for a variety of reasons. The main reason that you might see an increase in cases that a particular park is receiving consistent and ongoing complaints from the community, either through dispatch or code enforcement or through the Parks and Recreation, through a staff member at Parks and Recreation who usually will hear a concern. And so those our activities are directed to that park where we're receiving a variety of increased complaints so that we can be, one, a deterrent, but two, provide that education to those people that may not be aware of all of the park rules.
But these numbers are total violations within these parks within these months.
Yes.
And then did you also, right now we're only getting the type of violation counts quarterly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so next month you will have first quarter and part of second quarter presented to you in July.
Okay.
And so you can see the different statistics related to each park. And then we go into 2023, where we've done, again, you'll see spikes in any particular location. For example, at Jason Park in March, we had a very heavy call volume of complaints coming into the city regarding changes in off-leash, people utilizing areas in the park that are not off-leash privileged, a variety of other things we've also seen.
Is that a structural difference to the park at that time? Or it just happened to have a lot of violations?
It ebbs and flows. It's kind of one of those things.
That's one of the parks that got reconfigured.
It did, but it got reconfigured last January. It wasn't this year, so it's been over a year.
Oh, okay.
It'll be, yes. And so there were some changes and then we added the fence. And so a lot of the time when we had that separation, a lot of extra time was spent in educating the public and contacting them. And we had dog owners calling to concerned about, this area, people aren't supposed to be in this area. Can you please come out and do extra education? It's not just community members calling to complain. It's actually park users not feeling safe in the playgrounds because there's dogs. Those are the types of complaints that we're receiving.
So when you have like higher numbers in a particular park like this, do you put that on like patrol routes to hit more often than others, or how does that work?
So the park ranger is very cognizant of the concerns and the complaints that come in. And so he will spend extra time within that particular park, or a code enforcement officer, when the park ranger is not in, will spend extra patrols where we would go out and we'll sit in the park. We can be mobile. We don't physically have to be tied to our desk to do our work. And so we can go and sit within a park and do our paperwork, return phone calls, do a lot of things by being a visible deterrent in a specific park. Based on a
So
call
that's a
load.
common way you guys operate?
That's one common way that we utilize as a visual deterrent to behaviors that may be existing within a park that should not be.
Does each code enforcement officer have the same?
Every code officer has the same. Every officer that operates within the city of Englewood has this particular option to work remotely within a patrol vehicle, bring this computer back in and dock it to do the paperwork. And so that's kind of the philosophy that this department has gone to. And we do the same thing.
Yeah, you can say operating very much like law enforcement.
Very much. We
Yeah.
go to where we're needed the most based off of the call load or the concerns that are coming in. So an officer could spend extra time within a specific park, such as Bellevue or Centennial, where they may go and sit and do their paperwork, or they may have a snack or a lunch break in the park, just to be that ongoing visible deterrent to the whole point of us being there is to positively reinforce and change negative behaviors. And so just being there alone, or even if we don't do this, but some departments will actually have a vehicle that they go and park in a specific location to be a visible deterrent for speeding or for other criminal activities within an area.
Member Vaughn.
What's a case? In other words, what makes this list? Where do you cross over? What, is there a write-up? Because that's what a case is. What is a case?
That's a great question. So when we do a specific case, it's when we take a specific action related to that park. So the park ranger or code officer could specifically take an action to do an extra patrol and determine what violations may exist. And so that would be a case, and we would capture any information. Like today, I was at Jason Park and I warned 3 users about off-leash regulations, or I was at Jason Park and someone was smoking in a facility and I just reminded them of, the no smoking policy. Or we're at Centennial Park and we're doing an increased extra patrol. We inspected for fishing licenses and we found 2 people and asked them to no longer fish at the park. Those are the kind of things.
Written up
We actually write a formal report
for each case.
for each action. We call it a case, but each action that is taken.
So every interaction with someone counts as an action, even if you are just, hey, letting them know about a rule.
Yes. Because it's a formalized action that is taken and we need to capture that information. This was something that the Parks and Recreation Committee really asked, and the Englewood Off Leash and then the Off Leash Committee really wanted more information as to, because sometimes when we provide educational information on the phone, we don't always capture that information. But because we're actually in the field, working in the field to contact citizens or be available to citizens, that counts as a moment in time that we need to capture that data.
If you spend time on, if you go to a park where you know there's a lot of violations and you do your work there, but you don't interact directly with the public, is that considered an action?
It would be. It's like an increased patrol because we're actually expending our resources and time. It's the same thing as a police officer. If they were to do an increased patrol of a park or an increased patrol of a specific location, they call into dispatch or they type it into their computer, and that is also captured and quantified.
So these numbers could include just a code officer went and worked at a park because there's been reports of lots of whatever, or that.
Correct. Which was very invaluable when, and maybe you can speak to this, you specifically, there was an issue that occurred at Bellevue Park. And so they wanted to know how often is an officer in this park? How often are code officers patrolling the park? And so that information is utilized to present to the community that we are here, we are doing stuff. It is self-directed, proactive reporting.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. If you are counting within this the number of times that an officer sits and does his work, doesn't that sort of inflate that number to a point where it's not really representative of the actual infractions, but instead as a sort of a, just a tally of time, of touches on that park?
So dispatch can do that specific thing when we're just going through, but when we actually do an increased patrol, extra patrol, there are enforcement actions that are actively being taken.
Okay, so that's what they're counting. They're not just counting him or her.
It's actually the action of being in the park and being that.
So none of these numbers are tallies of an officer who just went, did their work in the park?
No, it's actually taken some type of an enforcement action with them.
Okay, while they were there, maybe they had interaction with a citizen
It could be an interaction with the citizen. It could be making sure that the wildlife is safe, checking fishing licenses, a variety of other activities that go into patrolling a park.
This does not break down severity in cases.
No, we are incapable of doing that because there's only one specific ordinance that applies to all of these rules.
Let me clarify here. So these numbers are really actions of where maybe you're checking licenses, but 2 people didn't have.
Right, and so
So they go to 2.
We don't put 2 in there.
Okay.
We would open one case. For example, if we were to work on 4th of July, which we do, and we need to take actions related to parking matters, we open one case and then we enter how many violations were involved in that one case. So these only capture that one time frame or interaction. So if someone was to write 3 tickets, we could write 3 tickets on that one particular case. Interesting.
What if you checked fishing licenses of 5 people and they all had them? It'd still be okay.
It is because we're doing an enforcement action. It's just like a police officer. They're required to document any kind of interactions that they have as well. It's mandated by law. We also want to make sure that we're capturing and accurately reporting the time that we're spending doing proactive enforcement actions.
Is this only proactive?
No, because then we could get a call to a park for a dog bite. And so that would be captured in that specific park.
Can we get separation between proactive and requested?
Not the way that this program is set up, no.
It's frustrating how.
Yeah, even the other program wouldn't allow us to separate that out in that function. We can separate all of them out as these are all the cases that are proactive, like how we receive the call for service, we have to check that box. So citizen, proactive, dispatch, city employee, referral from another agency. We can capture that, but we can't break them out. That's not possible. And even though it's just the
Total numbers, we can see
Yeah.
proactive versus requested.
Correct.
Have we seen that? I don't remember seeing that.
So in the annual report, there's actually a breakdown as proactive versus reactive. So you'll see a pie chart on the annual report that'll say, this number is the proactive enforcement, 69% or something like that is officer initiated enforcement actions versus the 1% of city staff referred cases.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So code manager, what do you make of this? When you look at this data, I'm sitting here thinking, what do I make of this? You guys are busy. You're doing your job. Is there any trend? Is there anything that jumps out at you? Is there any question mark that makes you wonder, could we be doing something different? Or is problem brewing in Cushing Park or no? I mean, what do you make of it?
So specifically with the trends, the only way that we are able to identify trends within a park is being physically in the park, working the park. So the types of reports that we read, speaking with each other, talking to the park ranger, hey, what are some concerns that you're having? We meet frequently, if not on a daily basis when we're working to talk about challenges that we're having, concerns, maybe some increase in citizen requests. And so that's kind of how we direct our patrols within the parks is based off of that.
So,
But these statistics.
but I'm not being a wise guy, but the point of it is you don't use this for anything.
The Parks and Recreation Commission does utilize how many calls occur within a
How
specific.
busy you are.
Yes.
Okay, and that's okay. This tells us how busy you are, park by park by park.
Yes.
How did they use it?
They mostly utilized it when it was regarding some off-leash trends, when they were reestablishing some of the parameters regarding off-leash privileges and times and what parks would be utilized for off-leash. So that was the primary purpose of why they established what's happening in the park. They're also very concerned about, for them, usability. What are the concerns that they're having within a park, and how do they maximize the use for all patrons within a park? And so they look at this to see, how much time is an officer spending? Why is that particularly there? Does Does a study need to be done about the environmental areas of crime reduction? Is there something else that might be occurring? Is it the vandalism to the bathrooms, which has increased? How do we address those kind of things? So they look at this as, okay, if this park is really busy, what are the concerns and how can we minimize the behaviors? They utilize this to go into the community, to ask the community, what concerns do you have about the park? A newer example of this was when we had a situation occur at Bellevue Park. The community came together and had conversations and made some requests about changing some lighting, changing the way that the park is used, cutting back some vegetation. And so this was part of the way to justify some of the improvements and needs that needed to be done within Bellevue.
So do these numbers include any interactions that would happen at the parks from law enforcement?
No, this is strictly on the codes division.
Okay.
I had a question. So month to month versus 22 to 23, except for April, they're like double or more.
They are double or more because we also did not have a staff member for a portion of that time frame, and so code enforcement was taking up that burden and spending extra time within the parks during those times versus having a full-time staff member to do that.
Has there been a noticeable result or change or feedback from that doubling?
I would say, and maybe you can clarify, we're really seeing a noticeably difference in voluntary compliance with rules. I would say one of the biggest differences would be at Centennial Park. We're not seeing the concerns that we had from citizens regarding wildlife, off-leash concerns, children, wildlife, negative interactions with dogs. When you go through there, you're seeing a much more structured environment that's more conducive for everyone to use. So people are riding their bikes through there again, people are fishing. That would be the biggest, most dramatic impact that we've seen by doing extra work within that park.
Have you gotten feedback from public about it?
The only feedback that we received was when council reevaluated the status of the off-leash privileged areas. And there were a few people that were very used to utilizing Centennial Park as off-leash privileged to do exercising with their dogs and their physical personal exercise. But that's the only feedback that we've received. We've had the number of negative concerns or complaints within our parks regarding our work has dropped significantly. There were a couple of concerns at Emerson Park where we started doing extra patrols because the neighbors on the park were calling frequently to report some behaviors that were occurring that were not consistent with the park rules. And so that would be the most recent example of some concerns about the work that we were doing. But complaints regarding code enforcement in general, having our body cameras recording interactions are the concerns and complaints related to the division have dramatically dropped, like way down.
Are each one of these rules represented in the municipal code?
No, because it is a park rules violation and the park rules are established by the Parks and Recreation Committee. They're also set by City Council as well as the City Manager's Office.
Okay, so the city charter says that those those groups have right to create the rules.
Yes, and maybe Councilmember Russell can chime in more on that, but there are different ways that a rule can be instituted, but yes.
The only thing I would say, what I remember is this has only been, what, 4 or 5 years ago. There was one ordinance where the rules went under the city manager. I don't think it was that way before. Am I remembering that correctly?
Correct. Yes. Some of the park rules would fall under the discretion of city manager. But the city manager doesn't unilaterally make that decision. They usually present to council, for example. Making our parks smoke free was actually an initiative by elementary school students that came to petition city council to reevaluate the rules. And so that rule was I'm not sure if it was officially codified in it. It wasn't an ordinance, it was just a rule
Well,
change.
and I don't think that it really ever was codified. I think they came to present and then it just happened. That's what I think how that one happened.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess my one thing in looking at these rules, are these posted, all these rules posted at every park?
They are not. So we have changed all of our signage to reflect the top rules that are the bigger safety rule violations. We can't put a billboard in the middle of a park listing all of these rules.
And who would read them all anyway?
No, and that's a good point. But we do redirect on the rule signs. Please go to witness for the complete rules. City Council has made a specific statement codifying all postings and rules as our official website being the official place that the rules will live, that notice that postings will be, as well as municipal code, as well as notifications to the public will be maintained within our website. So that's why they're that way.
Perfect. And I mean, that is true, but probably only the millennials are going to check that out.
It is, and which is why we take the educational approach with, first and foremost, park ranger code enforcement. We always take the educational approach in any type of violation, not just park rules, but that's the way that we process stuff.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Code Manager Lewis on this part? All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was extensive and very informative. It's nice to hear that.
There's 2 questions. Now I was just waiting. The first page,
Yes.
where is this?
So this specific, if you haven't gone to the Englewood website, there's actually all of the municipal ordinances posted that you can review all of them. That's where all of our codes are officially recorded.
And this has changed.
The only portion that has changed on this is the exclusion portion. I did not put that on here because that's not something that we're currently doing. It basically also goes into behaviors. And if you don't follow these certain rules or behaviors of conduct, you can be excluded from the park. Or from any city building. That also lives within this particular ordinance.
And that's in the municipal code.
It is being
Okay.
codified in municipal code by city.
Last year?
It was more recent than last year, but yes.
Okay, I just remember like 6 or 8 months ago, walking around and noticed that it was like added in, which was good because some people who live right by there get frustrated when people break rules.
Marijuana is illegal in the parks, which I'm asking because I walk through the parks and smell it all. Not because I want to do it, just throwing that out there.
It is prohibited as well as alcohol.
That in public is a state law. It's illegal to do that in public in Colorado.
Yes. There's just, I mean, I know that down to resource allocation and how it's enforced. And right now, our resources are being dedicated to serious violations over something that's going to get you a $25 ticket.
So does that mean you ignore it? when
We
you're
don't
at-
ignore it. We politely remind folks, hey, just a reminder, smoking is not permitted in the park, and also cannabis use. Cannabis use is prohibited with the
Is camping? Sorry, I walk through Bellevue Park every morning. And camping does happen in that park. Is that a reference to the situation where we have housing challenged people that are spending time in that park, and is that considered any?
So that's been in here since before the current economic and social concerns that we're having related to our unhoused. Our park's closed. So technically, no one's supposed to be in a park. So that is something that we can issue a park rules violation for. We, again, provide education, we clean them up, we remove them for debris or trash. It is very taxing on our resources. It's taxing on our park ranger, who also is working specifically with connecting the unhoused with resources and the crossover with our mobile response unit and our crisis intervention team. So right now, I would say that code enforcement is spending a considerable amount of time related to unhoused concerns, and we're redeveloping some processes to combat that.
Is that something that would, I mean, they're smart. They get their butts out of there by 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever, but I mean, that kind of thing that happens overnight, is there any aspect of supervision that happens at that time?
So if you're so we are not there.
Yeah.
The patrol officers are working 24 hours a day. You know, we have minimum staffing, but we also have to look at how many staff members do we have that are responding to calls for service versus being able to do proactive enforcement in parks. I want to say Bellevue is one that they do far more proactive enforcement in at nighttime versus some of the other parks because they're so small you can drive by them. But they do deliberately do extra enforcements within Bellevue. As you all know, we have been authorized by City Council, and so we will be increasing our count of officers, police officers, to do some of that. To hopefully be more proactive, because right now the police department is more reactive than proactive when it comes to enforcement efforts. Yes.
Although I have seen, I live by Duncan and I've been out, I walk at night because the heat sucks. And so I've seen officers drive around Duncan with their lights on, lighting up the park at night. And so I do know firsthand by seeing it that our officers are at least checking our parks, at least Duncan that I know of.
And again, that goes to the visual presence and deterrence, you know, making sure that people see the police officers, but having that light and it's just a great law enforcement tactic. I would say one of the concerns that we have is we may be issuing violations or the police may be issuing violations. It's just what are the next steps, what's happening once we issue the violation, what's happening on the judicial side. And I'm not able to comment on the way the judicial side operates, but I would say there may be some challenges to explore there.
So, because of the ordinance that city council passed, maybe it's been a year ago, about not being able to sleep or sit on the sidewalks, has that created more problems in the parks? I mean.
No. I wouldn't say we're not encountering those. We provide education, you know, if somebody's sleeping on the bench or we intervene with that, but I would say we're not having concerns with people obstructing sidewalks or.
Right, and I think some of that was just, I mean, you can't tell them they can't sit anywhere, but we use the ADA code so that, but I mean, that probably meant, and I think we talked about this, perhaps other right-of-way areas, you know, where they wouldn't be impeding ADA traffic if it increased there. I was just curious.
It's difficult to talk about that. We have police units that mainly deal with the unhoused, and that sit lie stand was also primarily for our business districts because that was at a time the most impacted. But within our parks, we have a lot more day users where people will come and spend their time sleeping in the park.
Thank you.
Just basic education, because I'm still trying to understand homelessness and some of the issues around it. But using the example, if police or your department shines a light on somebody in a park at 11 o'clock at night, that's the beginning and the end of it, right? Because there's no arrest. There's no follow-up action. Nobody's taken somewhere. There's no incarceration. So other than hassling that person at 11 o'clock at night, that's the best they can do.
Well, I'm not sure I would go that route. There are law enforcement tools that are available. If we're going to take an enforcement action and just shine a light on someone, and we see someone in a park, I'm confident that most police officers will at least contact that person because they've already started that enforcement action and take that information and put it through our CCIC and CIC database. And the significant number of the unhoused have warrants that may or may not be arrestable and transportable to the jail. But that also increases some concerns with having to store their property here and.
Sure. And I mean, it's a difficult situation, so I'm not pointing fingers, but I did learn a few months ago that that intervention unit does intervene for a homeless person in distress, because I called up and they intervened, but they took them somewhere. There's some service, but that's like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So if I'm going through the park at 10 in the morning and somebody's in distress, sleeping under a tree or something, I'm under the impression that if I call the police department, the non-emergency line, the intervention unit will come and possibly take them to a service point and to intervene. Is that correct?
We don't always, so they operate separate from what we
Okay.
do. There are services that they are tied into that they have access to, and at times they do need to transport people, whether it's to the WIC to get services or to an all health mental health facility, walk-in clinic. There are services that they can, if the person is requesting
Right.
transportation. They also have an ability to tap into additional services such as this person lost their ID. They can figure out how to get them ID, get them involved in the system. But that is a far more complex conversation than I'm a subject matter expert in.
Well, it's a tall order, and in a perfect world, all these things would be coordinated and there'd be information referral and there'd be humane intervention. But that's.
I will tell you, in speaking with my colleagues from throughout the state and nationally, that Englewood is really at the forefront of this type of work. I know there's bigger cities that have done some of this, but I think in the state of Colorado, we're leading the way with our mobile response unit, our crisis intervention, our co-responders, and the way that we're operating. It's always evolving and always changing, but I really am very proud of the way that this city has taken that, and council has seen the value in really taking the lead nationally on some of these programs.
On the cold winter day when I called in, I was very pleased with the response, because somebody came and helped that man. And I was worried he was going to freeze to death, quite frankly. So progress.
Well, I've been to Bellevue Park the last week. I had my 2-year-old grandson's party, and it was very clean, much cleaner than it has been in years. We didn't encounter any unhoused people, just nice families. And I hadn't been there for a while, since like the 4th of July the year before. And it was very, very nice.
Thank you for that feedback. It's nice to hear you say that. Any other questions about the parks? The final thing is just under significant events. I did want to let you know, if you're not tied into the city police departments, social media, or the cities, I mentioned at the last meeting that we were going to have the Cops and Bobbers event that took place. I have to tell you, this was the most successful event that this city has, I believe, ever had. Working with these children, giving away fishing poles, having an accessible event. We had several folks that had accessibility needs that we were able to accommodate. One of them was actually one of the grand champion winners of having one of the biggest fish. Having the Department of Wildlife out there, mostly a lot of code enforcement officers. We really were instrumental. Sean was great at tying 100 fishing poles together and getting them all hooked up one night. And so it was just a very memorable, fun event that the parents, and that we've had such great feedback, the parents, the children. We actually did a little video that I can't play here, but if you go and you join the police Facebook social media page, you can look at that video. You can just see the smiles on these kids' faces. We plan on doing it again. And I just know it's going to grow bigger and better every year. So I couldn't have been, I was out there working. I also had my son, some of our other police officers had their children out there, but just being in that environment of positive interaction with law enforcement, code enforcement, fire department personnel. I was so happy. I was very emotional about the whole day at the end of the day. It was long. We did a lot of setup and preparation for it, but I can't wait till it happens again next year. I'm so excited for it.
That's great. Glad to hear that.
Great name.
Top of the Bombers, yes. It's actually trademarked. It's a national thing, but it actually has been reposted and has circulated nationally, that event. So we've been recognized nationally for this function that we held. So I'm very proud. The next big event that we'll be working is July 4th.
That's everything for this provide update on board's questions. Review, request review for Q4 park rules stats.
Yep.
Okay. And
I'm not able to give you a breakdown of the animal, break out the animal portion of
how come?
the system just doesn't, we have to go through every single report to determine if it was animal related. Most of the calls for service that we have within a park most of the cases are animal related.
And that, remember, Emilheims, that was one of your
Yeah,
specific questions, right?
You asked if it would be possible to do that.
I did.
And you also had commented that that may not be with the limitations and we're
Well, and I'm just speaking strictly from, kind of understanding how can we as our group gain information that helps us to truly understand what's going on in a given park. And whether that is an access point on the website or something like that that shows some additional breakdown, I can understand that it gets to be a minutia thing. There's so many little pieces to it. But just looking through some of this information, which is basically a breakdown of, what kinds of things are being addressed. These could be clumped, if you will, into aspects of our behavior, the animal control issues, the specific things related to group activities in there, just in a generalized way for us to have a better feel for when issues are becoming issues so that we can take a sort of a more concerted look at it. Obviously, that kind of information can be helpful for you as well as park to understand better how the parks are being utilized.
So the system, again, I think I had explained that the system is not owned by the city of Englewood. It's actually owned by the county. And in order to do any of this, we have to spend a considerable amount of money to customize certain aspects of this program. And it's just not something that is currently available to us. They're going through a variety of changes with this programming. They've had a couple of big updates and formatting to address some issues. And we're getting ready to have another major update before November where they're changing a few other things. But this system just doesn't allow us without manually going through. And again, this is a template that is used nationally that's brought to us, and there was only so much that we could do to personalize the code enforcement module of the police function.
What is the system? Who makes it?
Central Square.
Central Square.
Is that correct?
Yeah, it's reporting enterprise, and from the admin side, to answer your question a little bit more, if all the park rules and regulations were actually in municipal code, the county would be able to add that from our EMC. However, the system's only built by the national company, which is Central Square. And this is nationally, it's only available that way, and that's what the county chose to go through either CRS, the Colorado Revised Statutes, or the individual cities' municipal code. So if it's outside of what's in municipal code, which is actually uploaded to a national database, either it's a code system or it's called LexisNexis. If it's outside of that, they're actually unable to load it into the system for a violation. So that's why we're unable to separate out each of the park rules violation. If it's animal, if it's golf or anything like that, because it's under that one title, that's at the very front, because that's where everything's housed within that system.
Is there no reporting that can be done out of it? I mean, and I assume it's in a database.
Yeah.
I think you'd be able to.
There is nowhere to record what outside the officer's narrative of what the sub violation would be.
Right, so can't you search this narrative?
Not within the officer's narrative to search like keywords or anything like that.
You can't.
And our module is also very limited compared to the police.
I agree with you. How much do you want? I mean, I'm a programmer myself, like it sounds ridiculous, but
That's not possible.
I know it's not your fault. I recognize that you're dealing with, and that's very interesting. Thanks for that. Officer Putro, to understand, to know that that's partly why it cannot be tracked is that the forms for recording cases, it's impossible to categorize separately except by what is specifically in municipal code. That's really interesting. I mean, it's ridiculous, but when you're building a system so it's nationally used and it's rolled out at the county level for us.
So Central Square is a corporation that has the same exact template nationwide. So if you have a department in New York that's using Central Square's RMS reporting, it's the exact same template that Arapahoe County adopted that Englewood has to adopt. There is no customization outside of what was adopted by Arapahoe County, which is set by the company.
It's kind of like going to, I know it's complicated. It's kind of like going,
No, it doesn't make sense.
it doesn't, but it's kind of like going to Staples or somewhere and you go and get a pre-made form for a landlord lease agreement. This is the same. You have to look at it kind of the same. It's the same package for
That part makes sense.
every single department.
What doesn't make sense is how New York, let's say New York City versus Englewood can't do their own reporting for what they want to look at within there. I'm not saying that you have to put it in as a separate code or you can drill down into the municipality code. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I should be able to search the subject or the description for cat and say, okay, we had 100 cats this week. And then New York would say, hey, we want to look for boa constrictors. Let them look for boa constrictors.
I mean, I see what you're saying as far as like being able to search the narrative, but that's never going to be as useful as being able to add additional fields and customize options for those fields for your city. I mean, it's crazy that you can't do that.
Agree, but I can, if each area that had their own input, you know, New York City, whatever. We're able to say, you know, select everything that contains the words cats, dogs, snakes, whatever. Then you'd be able to pull everything that says, okay, at least this is all animal. This is all people related. I mean,
Yeah.
How did it, okay, never mind.
Well,
I do this for a living and this, if I was in that company.
And I want to add, the police system is very different because they're also tied in with NIBRS, which is the national. So they're able to pull things differently than us because we are only municipal code. So they're able to assign a NIBRS code to each and every single individual thing because we're required to report that to the FBI. They can search specifically the people crimes. They can break that out. Their system is set up for that. Ours, we can't do that. We can't assign those national NIBRS codes to municipal code.
But if you can't, how are you not able to search the narrative for individual words that you want to look at within tickets you submitted? That's all I'm saying. That's all.
Can I chime in and then I'll pipe down because here's a question. Great software. It doesn't work for us, but we get a heck of a deal. In this day and age, I know people who write programs. 10 years ago, it was a big deal to write a computer program. Good God, artificial intelligence is going to do it next week. A high school kid, I'm not being a wise guy. There are high school kids who could write this stuff. Could the city explore the possibility of a pilot program or something with a junior college or one of the programs around here? I think you might be surprised. Keep doing it the way you're doing it. I respect that. I'm not saying blow it up, but I just have to believe there's a piece of software that could augment what you're already doing. When you do a keystroke here and it goes into your New York database, and guess what? The same keystroke goes over to Englewood software and it gives you exactly what you're asking. I think you might be pleasantly, maybe we get a grant.
So I hear what you're all saying.
Yeah.
We don't own this. That's the thing.
But why doesn't Englewood own something?
Hardware facilities. They would have to put it somewhere. So you buy the software, you have to put it somewhere,
Okay.
and you have to maintain that.
You know,
And then
laptops are
it's not.
$600. Anyways, I'm just saying,
It's not gonna be.
it's not rocket science. And what we're saying is this information isn't all that helpful for what we're trying to do. And I would just love it if Englewood could explore the possibilities of satisfying your needs, of saying what's perfect. I just think there's somebody out there, or there might be a product out there that might work.
And there may be a product
Yeah.
out there. It's just not something that this city has explored.
Right.
When we go to RFP, we have a whole process we have to go through, and I hear your frustrations.
Sure.
Because, you know, our staff have the same thing. We've always had
You're stuck.
limitations. Like our previous system did these great reports, but getting the data and information or looking at past stuff was, and recording things accurately and maintaining it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
So there's trade-offs, and unfortunately, this was the package that the city chose to be a part of with the Arapahoe County and multiple other jurisdictions in the county. It's a software system that we don't own, we don't maintain, we really don't have a whole lot to do with. It is our records management keeping system, and this is what we have elected to do, which is better than the handwritten words.
Probably something that will work on your phone, but I'll pipe down. But Rita, at some point, I think we ought to look into it, because I'll bet you dollars to donuts. There's something out here that would make their life easier and calm us down. To be able to look at data a little more knowledgeably.
I think the one thing that we have to be aware of is one, any system that code enforcement goes in with, we can't just have a high schooler or somebody else work with, because it also, like all of these departments all operate with law enforcement. And so how they interface with what is sensitive information and or doesn't have the weaknesses that many of these other programs have. I think we have to be mindful of that sort of stuff as well, because our code enforcement, along with most municipalities' code enforcement, is housed under law enforcement. We need to understand that there is a level of sensitivity, and probably part of the limitation with the stuff that Arapahoe County agreed with was probably because the sheriff had that as a framework to say, this is what we have to be concerned with. And some of this other stuff can hash itself out in other ways. And so is it a trade-off? Do we get the data exactly the way we want it? Maybe not. But also have to understand, especially when cybersecurity is huge these days, I don't see the numbers that we want matching up with the level of security that I know goes into keeping the firewall on the other side of these doors safe, is a greater concern than knowing the number of dog bites that we get in a month. So I'm willing to trade that off.
You know, obviously, anything that's gonna be rolled out in the police department or code enforcement is gonna have to be solid vetted software, but software is commoditized at this point. And I'm sure that even this system is built on top of something else. It's not likely anyway, adding fields and capabilities of custom fields to an existing package is not that much. I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with a national thing that's got a market cornered and you're in a position of running a code of enforcement department of a city that bought into a deal from a county with, you know, there's a lot of choices that you don't get to be involved in. I get it. Our complaints are valid because as citizens who are tasked with trying to help educate and make recommendations to our city council based on code enforcement needs, it's kind of ridiculous, the level of reporting that we're able to see. And that's not a complaint to you, because I understand you're dealing with the system you're dealing with. You don't get to make the decision about putting in a new system. And that's not where your time should be going, because you got to be doing code enforcement, working within the system you have. And I understand, security of course matters, but it doesn't justify a system that can't add another category to a case. Like it just doesn't. Like that's super simple stuff in this day and age, like Member Chisholm said.
And that's why my argument would be that if we're delving into the level that actually changes these sorts of things, that it would be a conversation higher than with Manager Lewis.
Yes.
And to say that it's
Something we
the
can
council,
recommend to
it's the council needs to be working on it. We need to be having conversations maybe with Chief Watson, who would have conversations with the sheriff to change those things. If we're in the system, it clearly needs to be a system change within Arapahoe County, and that's not going to happen with us or with you.
But that is
It's above.
within our purview to make a recommendation to city council that, the amount of data that we're able to get.
Yeah, we can make that recommendation.
Is very limited. It doesn't really give us what we need to be able to represent citizens that well. So, I mean, that's something we can do. That's the type of thing we should be coming up with, is recommendations to city council to improve systems. And so that, I would think that'd be a good thing for any of us to bring up, and, we can make a letter to council about that. That would be, and it could be as simple as Code Manager Lewis should have the capability to add a single additional categorization field to cases. I mean, and then include that in reporting. And, the fact that that is such a difficult thing, right? Because that's your understanding, is that's not even something that's possible within the system, right?
No, because the way that we categorize things is, this event happened in a park, it's a park rules violation, we categorize it as a park. If it's an animal related issue, then we categorize it as an animal related issue, but they don't go, but you can't do more than one. It's the same with police. They have to put multiple statutes under one main case.
Right. Has anyone from the city ever been frustrated by this?
We've just been frustrated with the whole process and system. So this is the least, I'll be honest with you, this is one of the small minority things that we're not looking at. We're looking at how is the user interface. Our user interface is not very positive. So for an officer to sit down and do a report takes a long time. It's just not a friendly system to utilize, and it keeps changing. And so once we adapt and work within a system, then they change the whole way that the system is laid out and done. And it's going to happen again in November. So these are the frustrations. It's more of the user experience than the outputs for us right now, because all we want to do is do our reports, get on to the next call for service, or help the next citizen. And this is all from the police side.
Your bigger concern is just the user interface being efficient for you to be able to handle more cases.
And so that's been the primary concern that has been coming forward, not just from us, but other users in the county. And it's not just the county, it's nationwide. Nationwide has been making these concerns. The large organization adapts and changes these overall concerns that constituents are having, and then push out the cloud-based update changes to the formatting. And, once we learn something, then we have to unlearn it because they've changed the whole system again. And so this has happened multiple times in the last 2 years. And so our frustrations is not this information. I know it is yours because you're not delving into
our
it,
interface.
but the time and energy that we're utilizing in learning the systems and relearning the systems, and then the time it takes to enter a report. It's faster to just write a report at this point for me than it would be to enter all the information that is needed in the fields for capturing a report.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question? So your team could sit down and identify what every problem was without any of this information. You know where the problems are.
We know where
what
the problems are.
and
Yes.
what they are.
Yes.
Which it's frustrating because it's like you're doing busy work that you really don't need to do.
Correct. Right. I agree. It is busy work, but in this day and age, this is the expectation of the prosecutors that deal with our cases. This is what they want to see. This is what the constitutional law requires that we need to do. And then things once we submit a report, we can't change it. We can't undo it. We can't add to, there's limitations. And so we do a lot of busy work. I call it busy work, but it's a requirement of our job to accurately meet the needs of the prosecution of a case. Because ultimately we prepare a case, not because somebody has a violation. We prepare a case for the potential that we might have to take it to court. So yes, thank you for clarifying that.
Right.
Quite under chairperson, for the record, I think it would be in the purview of this group to do what you suggested, is to just simply write a memo to city council and say, for the record, this is our concern. It may be impossible to change, but we want you to know it. We want you to know their hands are tied. They're probably spending a lot more time doing data entry than they care to be doing. And we're frustrated because we don't have the kind of useful information. At least then city council has heard from us. Maybe they can do something.
Would it be, would that be generic, or would he have to go in and say, these are the issues we're having, here's what we would like to see, here's what would need to be identified, that kind of thing?
Right.
I'm not saying for you to,
I actually,
but, right,
We're making.
rather than, because I don't think you really need to do a memo, because it really is not going to change anything. I will tell you right now that the leading expert in code enforcement on this particular subject matter is Lead Officer Futro, who has been piloting this program and working on this program for 4 or 5 years to even get us to go remote. We've tried a variety of things. He sits in on the committee that reports back to the county, because they have regular meetings, and reports back to Central Square. And so he can take this information that you're presenting, because we're aware of the concerns, and present those on behalf of this committee to see if that is even anything that they can do or are willing to do. And so that would be my suggestion.
Can we ask, so what types of things are you focused on requesting from them right now? Mainly user interface, we're getting case input more streamlined?
Yeah, so in April, the company Central Square rolled out the new user interface. The city actually postponed, well, the county as well, postponed that for about 6 months because the user interface was not user friendly. Finally, April came around and Central Square came out and said that this is new interface, we're launching it, there is no choice. So that did get launched. And since then, just like any new software, it is sending notes daily, weekly through the city IT's software person who's in direct contact with the county, who's in direct contact with Central Square, trying to fix all these issues. The update in April was fixed quite a few of the issues from the old system that have been in existence for 2 to 3 years since the system was launched that weren't able to be resolved in the old user interface because of limitations that were resolved with the new user interface. But because there's a new user interface, there are additional issues. So a lot of it is the user interface issues. There is, for the reporting side, a lot of the reports aren't even done through Central Square because their reporting module is still limited. There's actually a third-party reporting software that a few of us from the city, myself included, actually had to go be trained for a week on how to program.
Is it like an ad hoc type?
It's a Microsoft database that they use to join into the system.
Okay.
That us regular employees who have no computer background went into a programming class and actually programmed all these reports, reporting software that we use. And what we have said is what we have said. So that's sort of where the group is at. If there are larger issues, they are sent to Central Square. The answer, which we get a lot of the times, is we're aware of it on a national level. It'll be fixed in the next release. And the next release that we're aware of should be sometime this fall. Interesting.
How long is the contract?
I
mean, by the time the contract is over, it sounds like it's not going to be fixed still there.
That's very possible. And I know that's conversations way above anyone in this room, except maybe yourself. But there is a benefit that the department has seen tremendously with having a system that is countywide. Our ability to track people, follow people, help people, not only for our cases, but police department that we can see, well, Cherry Hills contacted this person. Well, now we know who they are, so we can help return a vehicle to them. That has been indispensable. But again, there are limitations like we're seeing because it is a countywide level. Our control of that system is very, very limited.
I don't know that we can get much further on this. I mean, we've done our job. I mean, I hear you about memos probably not going to make a difference, but it is kind of our thing and we do represent the citizens and it's probably worth getting it on record.
That's
with
where,
city
that's what I
council
would
that-
recommend, is we get it on record that we have expressed our concerns, that we feel we are limited in terms of our ability to complete our tasks based upon the limitations of the reporting skill, products that we have. And I think that that's the best we can do is put it before council.
Member Emmelhines, would you mind?
And then I step forward.
Something for us to
Absolutely.
include in discussion next meeting? Okay.
I think we did.
And then we can all, review that and add to it because we might, and plus we'll get input from Code Manager Lewis. When we write this and talk about it, I'm sure we'll come up with other things to include. I mean, that doesn't hurt you at all for us to make.
No, it doesn't hurt us at all. I just want you to understand that we have from our side, we have greater concerns and that we are trying to resolve at a bigger level than drilling down into these
Right. No, I
issues.
understand. You guys have to be able to record cases efficiently with what you need. I mean, that's first. Getting the data in and having that be a streamlined process is going to be the highest priority. But what data you're capturing and making sure that you can capture as much minutia as efficiently as possible is also a part of that. And then once the data is there, then reporting on it in a breakdown way that's useful for citizens to evaluate, that's also important. So, all right. I feel like we can move on from this.
Sure, and before we move on to council,
go ahead.
I am going to add this into new business because it is sort of a separate topic from the code enforcement updates.
Yeah,
So if you're fine, I'm just going to add it with the new business.
yeah, it'll be, will you be able to get a draft to us within a couple weeks?
Sure.
Okay, so then we'll have a review, draft, city council memo, as one of our new business items.
Thank you, sir.
I just want clarification. How do you want us to do this? Because we can't have a conversation about the memo openly because it would violate meeting rules. So
Well,
we
no,
can-
he's gonna write
he's
it
gonna write it.
and then send it into
Okay,
To put on
us, and then we'll put it in the agenda for discussion.
okay, perfect. I just want to make sure that there isn't like emailing back and forth. Okay. That would just be the only caution that I have.
No, I meant for him to just make the initial draft, bullet points, and then we can talk through it and turn it into something.
Although we could hash out a memo through email as long as all the emails are public. Under the home rule thing, all those
Well-
emails are just public if we're working it out. Just as long as everything that we're working out is made public.
My understanding is it has to be a public meeting. It has to actually be available to the public. When more than two of us are involved in a discussion, then it has to be open to the public to participate.
So if there's two, like we've been doing, like, for example, the communications, it was always like two people working on the communications projects, which didn't really violate open meetings kind of stuff, because they could meet, they'd have those conversations. But if they started sending things out to the bigger group and people commenting on it, then that's actually doing business that we
Even
would
if you
violate.
took all that, put it in our next agenda, it's still not, my understanding, it's still a violation of the open meeting rules. Because it's always been explained to me, at least from like city council members and from city attorney, that if like you and I, we could have emails all day long about a topic here. And then you could take what you and I did and go back and forth with a different member. That's pushing the line, but that's possible.
Right.
But if one of us sends something to all of us and then another of us comments back to all of us, that's violating the open meeting. Because it's not open to the public to participate.
That's a good explanation. Thank you.
You have anything else? Okay, I would like to ask some questions in regard to what the citizen who came in and spoke to us.
So if you don't mind, because if you'd like to discuss the process related to weeds, I'd prefer that because we are running close to time, I'd prefer that we do a topic for next meeting to talk about the process related to weeds.
They're pretty related. They're gonna come up in that part anyway. A lot of it's related to the
So if you'd like, we can
we can
ask that
move
we
on to
do an
that
actual.
part and then talk about it there. The parts that are relevant. That's fine. All right, so then update from city council, member Russell.
Okay, I'll keep it really short. Couple things. Number one, the board and commission appointments occurred last night. All of the reappointments that you guys thought were put on the committee, and there were no other openings. So the committee is full. The other thing that came up last night during council members' choice is that, and there was pretty full consensus that board and commissions will return to in-person meetings. Hybrid meeting would be available for limited use, which, I mean, it's already put this way, I think, in the code, that it's supposed to be the exception rather than the rule. So anyway, we will be going back to in-person meetings. And I mean, I have asked the city to check about the availability of a room at City Hall. Whether that's going to happen right away, I haven't gotten an answer to my council request yet, but because all of the boards and commissions are going back to open meetings or in-person meetings, I don't know if that will change the availability of anything, because I think it's going to take some logistics to bring that back into place. But hopefully I will have the information before the next meeting.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead.
Can we make this spot our official meeting space, especially with it being connected with the department that we work with directly?
Herein lies the problem. This board never met here in the police department at all. It's you're an advisory committee to the city council. And I think part of the problem is if you're meeting at City Hall, it's more open to the general public to come in and speak. I suppose if this board decided that they wanted to meet here, and I mean, I'm sure that's worked for you all.
Oh, yeah, and I forgot to mention, I apologize if I may take a few more minutes of your time.
Sure.
So this room in this building was designed specifically for the community needs. I don't know of anything in ordinance or charter that requires us to meet at City Hall. In fact, some of the other boards and commissions meet in other areas of the city and move it frequently. One of the benefits now to having this is our systems are completely working. And we are actually visually recording this meeting. So anybody can watch it and see the recordings moving forward. Our technology is actually a little better here in this building than now that it's up and running and our systems are back online, are actually better than at the Civic Center. But it's up to this board to decide where you want to meet. If you wanted to say next week, I want to meet at a park, this board can make that determination. It's not up to me. It's really up to all of you and what you find to be in the best interest of you. But again, we designed this room. It's not always used to the capacity that it should to meet the needs of community meetings.
Thank you. So other than those two things, right now I appreciate what the board is doing and the input that you send to city council because it is helpful. And so the only thing in choosing a room, this meeting has to be recorded, whether it's audio recorded. And we weren't always video recording the meetings.
It was always tape recorded previously, but now that this facility specifically has been designed to do open meetings and updated, we are hoping that a lot more of the community wants to utilize this facility as well.
All right, thank you.
Just to add on to that, yeah, I mean, we always met at in the city hall, different rooms, and I like that we have video here now. I definitely think that the video is a beneficial thing as opposed to just the audio. So, and I know that not every room at the city hall is going to have that. So there's pluses and minuses. I do worry about the possibility of intimidation for public to come in the police station. Like some people who are concerned about having code violations against them and they feel like, you know, they want to address a citizen committee about code enforcement could be, you know, intimidated by coming to the police station. So I want to be sensitive to that. And I think that's a reasonable concern. And so that's why I would personally favor City Hall, because that's where the main community rooms are. That's where traditionally all of these committee meetings have been. But I'm also, you know, I'm open to consideration of using this room. I would want better signage. I do think we need to have it super easy and clear where they go. I mean, one of our members was confused even tonight by where to go. And but
And we can
I
accommodate
I do like the video recording.
And we can accommodate that. City Hall has no signage either, so we don't post anything at City Hall. And so I think having one meeting at one space, everyone starts learning that this is the community room, but we will definitely do more than one sign posting and we're happy to accommodate that.
So, okay, let's think about that. Right now, we don't even really have City Hall rooms, right?
Right.
And you've is pretty extensively asked us about that, right? So for now, we'll keep meeting here unless we have a reason to do otherwise. So
then my concern with that is you get two messages when you go to the public access that says, this is where this committee always meets. And then they have to go to the agenda that may or may not say that. But if somebody doesn't think I need to go look at the agenda to see where it goes, it does say it on the agenda. But if somebody just wants to come to the meeting, they would go to City Hall. And they would always go.
well, that's
to the
where it
city
always
building.
was. It's only been here a few
But
times.
that's what I'm saying. So somebody would have to, if we're talking about our concern with the way citizens can access our documents, and or the way that we initially address citizens, just like with our citizens' concern, when somebody goes and looks, hey, what's code enforcement doing? They go to the front page of code enforcement, and this is where the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee always meets. And that they have to go to a secondary thing to then get the agenda to know that we're meeting here.
Yeah, I think it would be better to have it be consistent.
Yeah.
And I,
But I think it does say that, doesn't it?
It does on here, but I also want to just let everyone know we have 22 boards and commissions. And so it's very unlikely moving forward that any one board is going to have a consistent room anywhere within the city. Even at City Hall, you'll have to look to see which room you may be meeting in for that time frame. So
we did.
But I think we might be able to actually do that
yes,
if
because
we could utilize the space.
we have better control over this space because it is only reserved under the police department and you have to come to the police department to reserve the space. There's one person that reserves the rooms, the multiple rooms that we have in this department.
And then I think
It's a valid argument.
And I think then what it gives us the opportunity to do, just like when I call the police chief and say, how are we operating in community policing? We get to have conversations with our citizens about community code enforcement. And that if they come here for public speaking, that there isn't going to be a concern that there's an officer standing behind a door who's going to exact some retribution against them in this space. Although that could happen in any setting, like a long, the assistant chief is at every council meeting. And so, and law enforcement is there as well. And so an arrest can happen at any situation. I think just utilizing the space maybe gives us an opportunity to actually be proactive and actually say to the police department, and I'm the black guy sitting here and that's public record, that we need to be doing more things about the way we talk about our enforcement that is more community related. And that actually is inviting so that our citizens do feel like they can come and redress a concern and not have any fear.
Oh, so you're saying just by the sheer fact of having this be a regular community, citizen council meeting, it's kind of rubbing off on making.
Yeah, my hope is that it becomes, that we're saying that this is a space that's open to the public.
I see what you're saying. And I mean, the consistent meeting room, that's a good
Yeah,
argument
and
as
again,
well.
I mean, we instantly have a consistent meeting room.
So well, at this point, it is what we're using.
Yeah.
Because we haven't been able to schedule at the city hall, and the city hall isn't necessarily not available, but you're making good points.
Sure. City Hall system. Cool.
No, we did meet there in that room up in the, what is
Let
that?
me say goodbye to the previous members.
Yeah, we
That
met
was the
there.
last time we met
Yeah.
in City Hall.
Chair Green, I did talk with the city clerk's office. For rooms, there are only currently 2 rooms at City Hall that have audio and video. With the new security measures that have been implemented at City Hall, the only room that would not be behind a locked door would be the community room, which is pretty much fully reserved through the rest of the year. Everything else upstairs, all the other little rooms, due to the security, all the doors would be locked. It would be the same situation that those doors would be locked. We'd have to let people in for community meetings and that type of deal. So with elections and that coming up, especially this year, they do get priority. So those rooms, a lot of those have already been booked for the election process and that as well. So I do have this room already tentatively booked for the rest of the year for this meeting. That can change if you need me to, but I've already reserved it based on our conversation last week for this room. I did work with IT, the video we got up and running last week and all that. So I can guarantee what we can offer from this room. From the city side, the community room, like I said, is one of the rooms with audio and video. However, that gets primary for some of the other events in the city, like elections and city council, if they need to use that room as well. So we are limited on, I know some of your concerns with the locked door and that as well. We would run into those same issues at City Hall.
Okay. And you do have it now to where that stays unlocked until 7?
Correct.
Okay.
And actually right now, I got permission to leave it propped open even longer. So if someone does want to come in later, we just have to have one of us here. So we can clear the building before everyone leaves to make sure that there is no stragglers left in the building. So.
Okay. And what was the reason it took so long to post the audio? And is that going to be an issue with this video?
No, so the audio last time it's different uploads of the separate recorder, how they have to download it, save it in the city system and go a long way around. If everything works, I should be able to have this up on the site tomorrow.
Awesome. Okay.
Pending any craziness that may
Yes.
happen within the division, just as a caveat, we'd like to have it up, but again, day to day, our working requirements, something major could happen in the city. I hope it doesn't, where again, we support the police department and a variety of other factors that may take us away from our duties.
I do have the logins and I have the instructions on how to do it. So it will be my first time doing it from this meeting. But if anything else, I have city clerk. They know I want to get it uploaded by tomorrow outside of my normal duties. So I'm hoping it'll be up and running tomorrow.
Thank you.
And can I take another minute? I really need to recognize the work that Lead Officer Futro has done in putting everything together, getting the room organized, making sure, working with IT because it's been down and motherboards are messed up, making sure that this is working, learning new systems this is not part of his typical job. And so taking on the responsibilities, making sure that we had name tags, making sure that the doors were programmed and propped open. He really has committed to being a part of the liaison process. And so I really want to commend him for taking on extra responsibilities outside of his duty assignments for this committee. So I really just wanted to commend him publicly on
that. Anything else for City Councilmember Russell?
I have,
You don't have anything else? No other questions for, okay, thank you. So our communications subcommittee, Vice Chair Watson and member Redavid, I don't know that, have you guys done anything, found out anything? Okay, she was doing some communication on that. I don't know. Is there any update to knowing deadlines and us being involved in the topics for the magazine?
I don't have the topics, but I would recommend that potentially you come up with a few, like an outline of some things that you may want to cover over the next, because it comes out quarterly. So the magazine, if you want to discuss something that you want to put in the magazine, we don't even have to write the copy. All you need to do, we can meet if you want to call me. We can go through the process, but it's really just a few bullet points and they'll do the interviews and put together the copy for us. That's what we pay them.
Yeah, so maybe for next meeting, why don't you find out what their current list of upcoming ones are, and then we can talk about it and see if you have any other ideas to add or, and think about that as well. We have this as a tool, is there's social media and the city magazine that we can put notifications in, and, you know, we've used that for the Emerald Act for, we've used it for other things to communicate with citizens. So think about that, you know, community building type. Maybe we do one about this room, you know, like that is a possibility, like, you know, especially if you want this to be something that the community is more comfortable using, that might be a topic for it, something like that. But other ideas, whatever makes sense. All right, so now we're on to the review of these changes to Title VI, Chapter 5. So Section 652 on the reinspection fees. And when we met last time, we requested, we look at it in the minutes. For everyone who has the minutes, we asked for do shall and separate the court from you, because we want discretion. Or if this is, you know, if a reinspection fee is going to happen, but we also wanted it to make sure that it was, you know, similar to snow, where it's not a start at one point and then reinspection fees always happen after. It resets each year. And the language that we received, I don't see it doing that, but I'm also have questions about how it works. Any other questions? I'm going to start with mine, and then you guys can obviously ask as well. So the city may impose a reinspection fee upon a property owner or other person causing or contributing to a violation of the Uniform Development Code, environmental codes, or Englewood Municipal Code Titles 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, and or 16, if a violation is not remediated after issuance of notice of violation through city inspections to determine compliance. So it doesn't, the original, I have the original too, and that mentioned the limitation on in a calendar year, and that's been removed. And then it's been put into this structure. Now, one of my first questions is, like, I re-listened to our discussion from last time, and I'm not clear on why it changes sometimes from 21 days to 14. Can we start with that?
So we have the discretion to utilize the 7-day friendly notice that just is like, this is more of an education, to going directly to the 14 days. Ordinance only requires the 14 days. In fact, we don't even have to do that. We're not required. We can go directly to summons to a property. Do we do that? Only if it's a repeat violation. We don't do that. We always issue the notice of violation and allow them, by giving them proper notice, to do the corrected values.
So does that mean that currently you're never doing?
No, we mostly do the 7-day. The 14-day is when we really need to get people's attention.
Oh, okay. I'm confused by that. I got one of these on Friday last week, and it's inaccurate. It goes straight to 14 days. So I didn't get a 7-day friendly. It says that I had weeds too long on the alley side of the property, which I looked at it the day that this was issued to me. I went and took pictures. There's nothing on the alley side of my property that was too long. I have no idea what that's even referencing. And then the front side of my property had been mowed. And the only thing I can think is it's talking about the long flowers that I have in a rock garden that are not, like, I have mowed lawn and then I have a rock garden with, you know, native flowers that I've had there forever. So I haven't called the officer because I thought I'd bring it up since we're dealing with this. But it went straight to, so I didn't get a friendly 7-day.
We don't do that for weeds anymore. The 7-day friendly notice, we would have to turn around for reinspection within 7 days, which isn't possible. 14 days allows for a longer period of time and allows us to go back to do re-inspections where we need to do re-inspections. So we went directly to posting. It also allows us to take a more significant event rather than going through 21 days for a weed notice. This was something that was needed to gain more voluntary compliance.
So does the officer have a version of this that's a 7-day on them?
No.
So you're not giving 7?
No, we are not.
But you just said a minute ago you are.
Not for weeds. We're not doing it for weeds. So like your trash cans lids are off or your trash cans are out on the street too long or something like that. This is also an educational opportunity, but at the time we're also issuing a posting directly to posting.
Okay, so which things do you use the 7-day on?
So it could be, you've seen the door hanger and I don't have it in front of me, but it's a variety of different things, usually dealing with certain trash issues. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head.
So that's the one that you mentioned last time that
The 7
also
days.
educates them about other violations.
Yes.
But a lot of people are never even seeing that because they're like me receiving this.
When we're doing the seasonal weed inspections, we only have the opportunity to inspect a property, usually in past years once over the year, versus the twice that we're going to be able to do it this year because we have 2 seasonal code officers. But this is to serve as that educational posting notice that outlines the more what the city can do if it's not taken care of. The friendly reminder just is tongue in cheek that says, please make sure you cut your weeds. You have to keep them under 6 inches.
So what my experience would be when I contact this officer?
So you can explain that you have native plants. We're not horticulturists, so we are not able to look at the native plants and be like, hey, that's a xeriscape native plant. They may have seen something that looks like a weed. And so the onus is really on the property owner to say, hey, this is an intentionally planted landscape material. We've run into that with certain thistles because it's a cottage industry. And so they're harvesting these particular thistles from Scotland that they're turning into craft products. But it looks like a weed to anybody else.
Okay, has something changed this year? Because I've had the same thing forever and nobody's ever complained about that.
No, nothing has changed. It's just when the inspections potentially were happening, we're starting the inspections earlier in the season. And you have to understand that the growing season this year has completely changed. So the entire city is exploded with things that may or may not be perceived as grass or weeds. I would say there's very few properties in the city of Englewood that are actually in full compliance. I would say that if you were to go.
That are in full.
It depends on where you are, but if you were to go down an alley, in this particular instance, if they were going down the alley, they were issuing a notice to everybody that had overgrowth in their alley.
I didn't have any. I mean, I took pictures the day that I got that. There's none.
And I can't answer that because I'm not the officer. That
I know
that
we can't get into the details of the case, but it is relevant because it's what we're talking about. And like, if and now I've been triggered on what we're talking about with reinspection fees, right?
I would say no, because this initial one this is very different. Like, in order for us to take next steps, we'd have to come out and do another inspection and then finally send it forward. So you're looking at over 14 days, and we would communicate with you if we give another notice before we were to take any type of legal action regarding that particular notice. So we actually will go back out in 14 days if the significant violation is still there, and then we do an additional courtesy notice, really requiring you to contact the city to try and figure out how to solve this.
Yeah, I have 2 questions on that. One, what's the difference? Why did he get one taped on his door and she got one mailed to her?
I can't talk about specific cases, but if we're doing an inspection, for example, in the rain, If we're doing an inspection in the rain, we're not gonna get out of the car and go post the property. We'll send it by mail. If it's an unsafe situation where an officer doesn't feel like going to the door because there's a dog there's a fence yard, there's a dog in the front, we're gonna mail the notice. We're not gonna be able to post it to the door. If someone's outside that they may have some type of unsafe reason for putting it on the door, they'll also mail the notice of violation. It doesn't require us to post it on the door. We can also serve it by mail. We can send it by certified mail. We can meet with you in person to give the notice. And so this is really serving, we look at it this way. If we're doing inspections, we're doing mass inspections. Weeds has been the #1 complaint that the city has received. And so the more notices that we're able to give out, even if it's a small violation, providing this education, we get 96% compliance from these notices. It's only a few that we actually have to take forward.
So where are their addresses recorded?
We record it in RMS. So every address, it'll say grass and weeds observed in the front or the back. And that's the way that we record that. When we go out to do a reinspection, because if it's not in compliance, then a code officer will take pictures and document it as required under ordinance.
If they're doing a drive-by, like say it's raining, they get the number wrong.
So that also sometimes could happen. I'm not saying, you have to understand there's a human element in anything
No,
in
I
police
get
work, and sometimes mistakes happen. I'm not able to say whether or not there was a mistake that occurred with a specific case. But again, they write down the number and then they will mail the notice of violation to some of the properties.
Do they add days to one that gets mailed?
They put the date on there.
They what?
They put the date. They usually will handwrite a date. I don't know.
But I mean, they won't necessarily have 14 days if it has to go through the mail, right?
Yes.
We usually go off of the date that's listed. We're not going to inspect a property exactly in 14 days. We don't have the staff or time to do it in 14 days. In reality, it's probably going to be 3 or 4 weeks. The properties that we originally posted 4 weeks ago are just now getting re-inspected due to just staffing and the number of complaints that we've received. And those are the ones that are being redocumented, making sure that we take pictures. We're giving them one final opportunity to correct the violation by doing a reposting of the property. And so that's kind of where we are. We've sent forward a few properties for abatement that, again, are outside the 4 weeks, have exceeded their final posting notice as the additional posting that we do out of a courtesy. And so those are moving forward with judicial or with correction or enforcement.
And in the case of, as far as I'm aware, I don't know what this was about. And I took pictures the same day so that I could discuss it with the officer. It sounds like that's similar with the citizen.
Any citizen has the opportunity to call the officer. I mean, the information's on there.
No, but my question is, so then what happens? So if which I'll do tomorrow, I'll call the officer and then I'll explain. I don't understand what you're even talking about. And so then what are his options?
So he can say, okay, well, we'll mark you down as compliant and make a note that, okay, it's seasonal wildflowers that were intentionally planted. You can request a courtesy reinspection where they go out when their time allows them to do a reinspection and redocument the property. But these are documented as warnings. When we put them in the system, they're not technically a formal inspection. It's listed in our system as a warning.
Does a citizen who has one of these warnings and then it deals with it, do they get something in writing that it's been dropped?
No, we don't have the ability or the staffing to give something that's dropped. It's either in compliance or not compliance. Again, that's where we run into the 96% that come into voluntary compliance. It's based off of a redrive through. If we go back through in a month and we're like, oh, their trash is still, their weeds are still there. It hasn't been corrected. Now they're 6 feet tall. That's when we'll take additionals.
And that's when it goes to the summons.
Summons and or abatement.
So a quick question on.
Point of order, I'm really confused as to why our guest is passing notes to members of the
know about
committee.
this. Okay, oh, sorry.
So
I don't know
I had a
anything
quick
about
question
that.
on the trash cans. If you give them a 7-day grace period and trash is picked up every 7 days,
They get the friendly notice. That's because trash is picked up every 7 days. We all know that. But we also go one step further and we call the trash companies and we find out whether or not they have trash service. So that's more of just a friendly reminder. We're able to investigate that. With grass and weeds, it's either you have overgrowth or you don't. At the time of the inspection, there was something that was observed that would trigger an overgrowth or grass and weeds notice. A citizen has the opportunity to call and say, hey, you know, this is intentionally planted, or this is my xeriscape, or I'm really, and this has happened. We hear the phone calls every day. Can you just clarify for me what you're talking about? Oh, well, you know, you got your yard, it's beautiful, but along the sidewalk, you have really tall grass or sunflowers or whatever it is that may be obstructing the sidewalk from being passed. And so that's where the communication comes in. We're asking our team members to be more diligent in writing more specific notes under the other section, rather than just hanging it or mailing a notice that says back or front.
What is the admin appeal?
So you have the opportunity under ordinance to do an administrative appeal. The administrative appeal does not do a finding of whether or not you're guilty or not. All an administrative appeal, and it's done through the court clerk, not the city clerk. All it is I'm requesting a hearing to determine whether or not there's a violation. Code enforcement will meet with the administrative person, which is usually a court clerk person, and we say at the date and time, was there a violation? We show them body camera or whatever we have to prove that there is a violation. And they're like, okay, well, there's a violation. We'll move this forward to the rest of the enforcement, or yes, you have enough to move forward with the next phases. There's only been one administrative hearing that I'm aware of that's occurred since I've been here in the last almost 9 years. And all it is the administrative hearing is, was there a violation at the time that the notice was issued, yes or no? And then the determination is yes or no, there was a violation. This is continuing to move forward. It's not an opportunity to voice concerns. It's not an opportunity to voice your side of the story. It's, was there a violation that occurred on that date and time?
The court clerk is the judge of whether.
It's not a judge. It's just an administrator.
Decides whether there was or wasn't.
The court clerk says, will say, was there a violation at that time? What's the city's position? And then they would say, yes, you can move forward with the enforcement, or yes, you can continue on with the posting notice. So the administrative hearing really doesn't serve a purpose anymore. The thought when that was written into the ordinance was that a majority of code enforcement cases would have eventually been changed from being a criminal, I use the word criminal, but a municipal code violation to an administrative violation, which our codes have not been moved to administrative. And so that's where this particular ordinance would have been utilized. But again, all it is a determination whether or not a violation was on the property at the time that we issued the notice. There is no fact-finding mission. There is no opportunity to give testimony. It's just, was there or was there not a violation at the time of the notice?
So are the officers that are doing the proactive weed things like this, are they taking pictures?
They're not able to. They don't have the functions. They are not a fully sworn municipal code officer. Again, it's when people call in, we're saying, you know, this is an educational opportunity. This is the information regarding this violation. You have 14 days to rectify it. You're not the only one on the block because the entire block was inspected on that day, and anybody that had a perceived violation would have received that notice.
Okay. Go ahead.
So my question is, when I get this notice too, I get it every year because I don't even use my alleyway. And so it reminds me that our alleys are undeveloped and I'm responsible to mow it when there's an overgrowth. But I did just recently have a tree fall in my front yard, which is slowly being chipped in my backyard, and has some native things growing around it. And so my concern with my notice, having that and also the alley thing, is that there's nothing specific in the notice that lets me know if I'm okay with just doing my normal alley mowing, or I actually have to pick up the pace with my already busy work schedule to trip a tree and or clear an area that hasn't been a concern in the past.
So this is only addressing grass, weeds, or overgrowth, obstructed alleys, or obstructed sidewalks. That's the only purpose of this particular notice. If it was a concern related to your tree, then that would be a whole different notice regarding specifically the accumulation of junk, debris, yard waste. That's a completely separate violation that would be issued separately.
So if it is about that, then I'll get a second notice because my alley is fine.
You would receive a notice about the tree.
Okay, it would say something specifically about this tree that's slowly
That'd be a
disappearing.
7-day one?
No, it would be, we would most likely do a 14-day with the tree because, and it depends on what the tree, if it's a regular tree notice, like it's a dead tree type situation, it's actually 45 days. So it depends on what the circumstances with the code. If it's an accumulation of tree branches, debris and stuff, sometimes we would do the 7-day. Most of the time it's 7 days. Most of the time we're able to just politely talk to the person and be like, hey, do you know you need to do this? We don't always take formal action related to all code violations. And this process hasn't changed. Like we've been doing, this is our going on our 4th season of seasonal code enforcement. So like you said, you've received this notice in the past and you've seen this before.
I have a question. You have 2 code enforcement officers that go around. Is that right?
Seasonal officers, it's their responsibility that are to only do grass, weeds,
Okay,
overgrowth and obstructions in the alley and sidewalk.
okay. What kind of, I'm just curious of what kind of training or tools do they have to determine the difference between a noxious weed or a weed and native plants? I think there's there is a difference what some people call a native plant and what other people call the weed or a noxious weed. So, and I know that there are, and when we lived in Summit County, I know that there are I have a book that tells you what are all of the weeds and the ones that are a problem and that need to be addressed, as opposed to native plants like a penstemon would be a native plant, a flowering native plant. Do they have, I mean, you can get this from the Extension Service. They're free booklets that they can carry around. They can use as reference. It'd be very helpful to them. And also would be helpful to the citizens if they're confusing native plants with the weed.
That's great feedback, and we've tried to incorporate some of that. We look at it from the standpoint, and our ordinance is only written to say grass and weeds over 6 inches. A person is not required to get rid of dandelions. They're only required to keep them under 6 inches. And some people may argue that dandelions are utilized for native purposes, and they are. They are traditionally utilized as a food source for medicine and for other things. So the ordinance and the way that it's been interpreted is only grass and weeds must be kept under 6 inches. And again, we will take a citizen's feedback and we will change the status of their case if they're able to articulate. I particularly, we have a CU extension professor that lives here in the city who calls us every year and says, I've intentionally planted these native grass and weeds. He's kept his receipt and all of his information. He gives us the heads up. I have to have them go to seed in order for them to repropagate themselves. That would be something that's intentionally planted. That is specifically native grass and weeds. Your case, and again, I don't want to talk about specific cases, but you're talking, if someone was to come forward and say, I intentionally planted these plants at xeriscaping, great, we'll take that into consideration. The only thing that we can look at is that grass and weeds are over 6 inches, and some intentionally planted foliage may be interpreted as weeds. But again, there's thousands upon thousands of plants, and we're not able to identify every single plant from every single native grass or anything of that circumstance. And so it really, again, this is why our information is at the bottom. It's a two-way street. It's not just us delivering the information. You may get the bad news and you may be like, oh, the city, I cannot believe they're doing this. And then they give us a call and they're like, hey, I just want to let you know these thistles that you get complaints on, this is what I'm doing. Great, we'll document this. We'll put this in. We'll change the status of your case. It would be the same. It would be the same with anyone. It's not like we're out there with a ruler at 6.5 inches being like, oh my gosh, your reads are that big. We are really issuing these for those situations that appear to be very mostly egregious. But again, we look to the left and the right and the whole block. We're not just inspecting one person's house, we're looking at the whole totality. It's the same thing with code enforcement. We get a trash complaint at one property, we go and inspect it. We always also look to the left and right and we're like, oh, well, these people are in violation too. And these people have another code violation. We don't do selective enforcement. It's all or nothing. And so some of it is a little interpretive and some of it may be subjective. But that's the same with any city or any kind of plan. And Summit County had, they're having a different circumstance than us because we're a planned community that has very few large open spaces or grass or fields. And so some of those specific noxious weeds have been introduced and are invasive. And so that's why Summit County was utilizing that program because there are things that they're wanting to get rid of so that they don't take over native species, native wildlife, or take away the new.
But I see the same plants here in Englewood.
Some, yeah.
I will tell you that. And my other question, and your point is well taken. It speaks to discretion, and that's what we were talking about. But earlier, but I would like to have one of those code enforcement officers walk with me through my neighborhood because the weeds are rampant.
And what we're
in my neighborhood.
And I should explain the process, and I'm sorry that we actually have an established program where the city is broken up into specific zones. And so we have one person starting on one side of the city and one on the other, and they're inspecting zone by zone. We found that in the past, we were doing very subjective, very selective enforcement because we were just going by complaints. And so we weren't equitably enforcing the ordinance through all the city. This is the only way to equitably enforce grass, weeds, and overgrowth in the city by utilizing a zone grid inspection method. And so that's what code enforcement does by a quarterly basis. They go through and they do the major arterial areas in their new district, and they use a grid format as well as taking complaints from citizens. But grass and weeds, we have a methodical way in order to equitably enforce throughout the entire city, and so that the entire city will be inspected front side and alley side when applicable. We're hoping a minimum of 2 times this year instead of.
Have they gotten to ours? I don't think they have.
They may not have been on that specific grid.
Because I mean, it is outrageous.
The whole city. You can, I can walk out the front door. There are quite a few citizens that are not very happy. They don't like the fact that we enforce grass and weeds. I get it, but you have to look at it from this standpoint. We are having extreme weather that is very wet, that is making our grass, weeds, intentionally planted landscaping go crazy. Well, at some point in Colorado, we all know what happens with all of these grass, weeds, and plants, that eventually they are going to dry out and die back. And if we don't take care of them currently while we're doing this, then we are adding fuel to potential fires in the city. And that is the primary reason we do grass and weeds enforcement. It's not just aesthetic, but at some point we're also looking at a potential fire hazard. And so we look at it from a safety standpoint as well.
My concern is not so much the occupied residential units. Those people pretty much take care of their houses and their property. I'm talking about houses that are abandoned.
Yep.
I'm talking about open lots, commercial lots for sale or going to be developed where the developers do nothing about it.
Well, I hear you, and we actually are sending those forward for abatement. So I want you to understand that we go through the process, and it's that we have 3 vacant lots and 1 abandoned property that we are sending forward for abatement this week that have gone through the notice process and nothing has been done, and we will lien their taxes. So we are doing that. It takes time to inspect the city, and if we were to jump around all over, then we're missing large sections. And I give you my commitment. Any type of undeveloped lot or abandoned property is getting more of our attention to the point that we actually are introducing legislation soon that is going to require vacant lots and abandoned properties to register with the fire marshal's office so that we have a direct contact. We're able to contact someone. We're able to devote extra resources to those undeveloped parts of the city. So that is something that's coming forward. It won't come to this committee. It's an initiative through the city manager and fire marshal's office.
Kudos to you for that. Thank you. That's wonderful. If a citizen does contact your office and says that they're, these are native plants, this is a, xeriscaped area, whatever. Is that notated on their property so that the next year when the grid is done again, that they aren't going to get another?
There's no way possible in capturing that and maintaining an exceptions list. It really is seasonal. And I wish we had a way of doing that. We just don't have the time or resources to devote to an exclusion list like that. It's just not possible. Again, with our systems programming, it is incumbent on every year in communicating that to us. And I know that it's a hassle, but that's again.
So a proactive way for a citizen, which could be put in a newsletter, is that if you have areas which are native grasses or are xeriscaped areas, that you should contact code enforcement and let them know that you have that, and that would that hit off any of this?
No, it won't. There's no way of capturing that and maintaining it.
Okay.
How do you keep track of the re-inspections then?
So re-inspections are different because it's automatically triggered and stays open to as a case, just like an investigation or police. So the way the workflow works is a code officer enters a case. That case isn't closed unless it's resolved. In these particular cases, they're closed as warning. When an officer goes back through and sees a very egregious property during the re-inspections, they're able to open up that specific property for that year and see, oh, they've already received a warning letter. We'll go ahead and do the posting again.
Okay, and then one more question, since on here it has, please contact me at a phone number, but we heard from a citizen that she used an email. Would that work?
So our seasonal code officers really are not in the office to deal with emails. That's specifically why the contact inspection line is listed on there, because that's the best way to contact.
If when I call this, it'll go to this officer?
No, it'll go to our inspection line and you can leave the information, and then we will transcribe that to give to the seasonal code officer to do follow-up.
Okay. Thank you.
They don't have direct phone numbers here in the city.
Right, so we're at 8:12 and we have not gone through this. And
No, we got
personally-
distracted, and I'm sorry.
What?
I'm sorry. I went.
Well, no, it's been.
It's very educational.
This meeting has been with information. It's very, this is what we're here for. And I really appreciate this committee. Like everyone here is contributing and we're like, this is great. And of course, I really appreciate the way that you're able to answer all this and that you do, you're doing a good job. And thank you. And I think that, I know you want to move this forward, but I think this warrants further discussion. So I think we need to move it to next month. Because I don't want to keep everyone too much later. I don't know what everyone's situation is. We don't usually have to go past 8. So we'll move this forward. And maybe we'll reorder. I mean, I can't imagine that by the time we get to unfinished business next time, it's going to be almost 8. I think that would be shocking. It's very unusual that it would take that long. But we'll move this forward into unfinished business for next time, the review of this.
And might make a recommendation that maybe we change the order of our agenda to maybe put this at the top of our agenda, since it seems to be, we keep cutting it off.
This time, let's put it, so let's change the order, because I think we should still have the public forum first. If that's, if there's anyone, because it's nice if you're a citizen and you're going, you get to speak quickly. So I would say, let's for next month, to make sure we hit this, let's do unfinished business as number 4, and then just have the rest come right after that. And then we'll keep new business where it is. So we have 2 things in new business. We'll have the memo to discuss, the draft of that, and then we'll get to our priorities. But I mean, our priorities are primarily for when we're not packed with things we're dealing with, and we're dealing with a lot right now. So this is good. Does any committee member have anything? All right, thank you. We pretty much have already discussed our topics for next meeting. I appreciate you putting all these the references in here for you know, rules of order, the updated handbook and all that.
We have a good for a reminder.
I'm glad I didn't hit print on the whole.
Yeah. And for any new members or reappointments, please go through all that information. The city is gonna require signatures for when you are reappointed or elected into a new position on those, to make sure you do review them. So at the meeting, and I believe in August is when it was moved to, when we do have elections and that, I will be collecting signatures that you have reviewed all this and accept it before you're sworn into your position. So if you could review those now before August, that's why they're attached.
Okay, and then what's the date of the next meeting?
The date of our next meeting,
19.
19th.
correct, July 19th.
Okay, so July 19th here, 6 p.m. It's clear. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll adjourn. I'll see you next month. Agreed.
No, I think this is.